You need to put fusible interfacing on one of the front fly pieces. So this side has the glue, so this adhesive will melt with the iron once you put it on. I like to cut mine a little bit smaller than the other piece, like just cut it in the seam allowance so it's less bulky. I'm going to take my press cloth. I put an X on this side, which will cover the interfacing, otherwise you will end up with glue on your iron. And we're just going to give that a press for a few seconds and that will adhere it. Take the other two fly pieces and sew them together, right sides to right sides. I'm going to make an L down here and here. Clip your little corner for the seam allowance, and then we're going to flip it to the other side, press and serge. Take the single fly piece and put it right sides together on the front right skirt pattern, and we're going to stitch down here with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to sew the center front seam. So I have my notch here, I've pinned it to make it easier to see. So we're just going to line that up and sew from the notch down with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Take your fly piece and we're going to sew it face down over here. And we're going to stitch along this edge. Once you've sewn this, we're going to flip this over and we're going to just edge stitch this along here. We're going to have to move this to the other side. You could put your regular foot back on as well. I'm going to leave it like that. So now your zipper will look something like this. Zip it up to the top, and we're just going to line up this edge with your stitching here. So you just want this fly to be lined up just so it's like just covering your stitching line there. And we're just going to quickly pin that in place. We're not going to sew quite yet though. There's still one more thing we got to do. When we go to sew the zipper, you need to open it up here. And I'm just going to hold that in place there. And then pin my zipper teeth in here. So I'm going to stitch just this part here. Okay, we're not going to sew this part here. So just pin it there. So you just, if you want to check again, it's when you zip it up, it should line up nicely here. I guess I don't need that one in it anymore. That should line up nicely. Okay, so I'll stitch that real quick. So zip that up out of the way, put my presser foot back down, stitch the rest of the way. Now your zipper should look like this. If you zip it up to the top here, that should look pretty good. So this, of course, will be folded down this way. And we need to do the top stitch around the fly. I like to just, we need to make sure that we have this laying smoothly. I'm just going to put a little pin like that. If you top stitch this with this zippered shut, you might zip the fly together, so you won't be able to open it, so don't do that. Okay, now we're going to top stitch along here. If you'd like, for the top stitching part, you can use chalk and draw on your shape, or use a template, or even a thread basting. I'm just going to do it freestyle today. I am, however, using this line as I have a line right here, so I'm using that as a guide. You can also put a piece of tape on your machine to use for a guide here, if that helps too. So I'm probably about an inch up from the bottom of the seam here where the zipper ends, and I'm going to start to move towards that. I'll move this zipper out of the way now. And then you want to backstitch or bar tack across the bottom. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to tidy up my threads there. So there you have the fly part finished. Apply fusible interfacing to pocket area on skirt and welt piece. Next, we're going to do a welt pocket. So I did the first one over on this side, so I'm going to show you how to do it over here. So I've marked the placement of the welt pocket with thread here. And then we're going to take our piece with interfacing on it. We're going to lay that over top, pin it in place. And I'm just going to check. I'm going to peek under here to where these lines, to where the thread markings are. And I'm just going to draw on the little rectangle. And that will be our stitching line. Okay, and then we are going to stitch around this rectangle and come right back. Now that we've sewn this rectangle, we are going to very carefully cut a line down the middle. When we get to the end, we do this little triangle shape. So the trick is to go as close to your stitching as possible, but you don't want to cut your stitching. So you want to make sure you have really sharp scissors here. So once you've cut this little triangle here, we need to go to the ironing board. Okay, so it should look like that. Next, we're going to press the opening open. So I'm just going to finger press along here first. I am going to grab my press cloth because if you iron the interfacing directly, you will gum up your iron. Once you've pressed this open as best you can, we are going to flip this to the other side. I'll remove these thread tacks a little bit later. And the top one, I'm going to press this. I'm just going to sort of crease that with my fingers along the stitching line. I'm going to press that. The bottom piece gets folded up, something like that, to meet the top piece, right here. So this creates the welt here. Now you notice that this corner doesn't look so good. It's a bit bunched up. We need to deal with the little triangle piece. Just going to take it to my machine and stitch right here. So I've gone ahead and I've stitched just this little triangle piece on both sides, and that is helping the front lay smoother. Once you're happy with how that looks and it's nice and pressed, I'm going to flip it over, and we're going to take our pocket bag and we're going to sew along the top and bottom here. Once you have sewn along the top and bottom edges, we're going to take the fold line, which was marked in the pattern. I just marked it with a pin here, and we're going to fold that. And fold that down like this, and then stitch along the pocket bag sides, and then the pocket is done. Now we're ready to assemble the main skirt panels together. So here is our back piece. This is the center back seam. We're going to flip that right sides together and quickly stitch along here. Okay, now we have our back here. We will press and serge that in a minute. I'm going to flip that over and sew our right side of our skirt down along both side seams. All right, so our skirt is getting close to complete. I've got the waistband pieces here, and we're going to attach the right to the left, right sides together, and sew along the seam here on both sides. Once these are stitched together here, I've pressed mine open, and now I'm going to match these up and stitch along the top edge. So I've now sewn my waistband together along the top, and I've pressed it. So I'm now going to take the center back seam here, and I'm going to match it up with the center back on the skirt, right sides together. I always like to match up my seams. It just helps make it look good. Pin all the way around, and over here where the fly is, you'll need to unzip it. Make sure you leave a little bit of seam allowance right here. And over here, you want to match up the notch with the edge of the fly. And again, I folded this back here, so we're going to stitch along there. So now we're going to sew these edges and sew along the skirt waist. So I folded the edge in here, the seam allowance on the inside, and I pinned it with metal pins. So I'm just going to press in between here, because that will make it a lot easier when you go to stitch in the ditch along this side. Mark and sew buttonholes, cut them open, and then hand sew buttons in place. To make the hem, I folded this up 1/4 of an inch and pinned with my metal pins and pressed, and now we're going to turn it up another 1.75 inches. Pin and press, and then we'll top stitch that all the way around.